My parents rubbed dollar store skin whitener on me every morning for years. When I finally showed up at their house with my natural brown skin and a boyfriend, they called him a monkey and tried to bleach my face until it blistered. When I screamed for them to stop, my dad just held me down and yelled, "Pain is beauty." My family are the most racist people I've ever met. Whenever we went outside during summer, my mom would count the number of times that me and my older sister stepped out of the shade. And when we got home, each time was equal to one hard slap. And for years, our morning routine consisted of our mom rubbing skin whitener from the Dollar Tree all over our bodies. And the whiter we looked, the better treatment she would give us. I remember just always wanting to be a normal kid. But my sister, on the other hand, she was a whitewashed queen. Every night, she would set an alarm for every 2 hours to make her sleep as disrupted as possible. That way, she was exhausted all the time, which naturally made her look more pale. Like, what in the bombo clot? And instead of our parents telling her that her health was more important than making sure she didn't look Hispanic, they would treat her like royalty. They'd shower her with beautiful dresses, expensive jewelry, literally just anything she wanted. Soon it became clear who the golden child was, and if I wanted their love, this is what I had to do. But I was desperate to find other ways. Getting straight A's in school, cleaning the house top to bottom every weekend, giving my parents foot massages. Thanks, honey, but I really wish you worked this hard on getting beautiful pale skin like your sister, they'd always say. And after my parents got me a literal bleach hair product shipped from Africa for my 16th birthday, I spent the entire day crying into the Barnes & Noble's teddy bear in my room. And that's when my sister came in and hugged me. I figured she was going to say that she'd always be there for me, that beneath the skin color I was still her sister, and that was all that mattered. But no, Layla, I love you and I want to help you. Look at me. I stared at her malnourished self, the eye bags forming crates under her eyes, the chemical burns on her scalp from straightening her hair. If I can look this beautiful, so can you. I swear I thought she was pranking me, but the spark in her eyes told me otherwise. She truly believed that treating herself like that was the way. From then on, I started wearing foundation that was 2 shades too light for me, and always found a way to cover up the rest of my body. Not because I hated my brown skin or natural curls, but simply because it would make my parents happier. And after all, they were the people that birthed me. Fast forward 6 years later, I just graduated from the University of Florida, and when last Thanksgiving came around, I was feeling really good. I had taken up running and spent so much time outside that I was forced to embrace my natural Honduran beauty, and I loved it. And my boyfriend Carlos loved it too, lol. He was half Puerto Rican, half Italian, and very much familiar with the whole internalized racism thing, but he was also white passing, so I expected everything with my parents to be okay, until reality hit. I showed up at my parents' house with him holding my hand. I had even put on a slightly lighter foundation to lessen the blow of everything. When the door opened, I saw a woman who looked like my sister, except more depressed, deathly pale, and extremely skinny. My heart broke, and I guess hers did too, because as soon as she saw us, she cried out, "Dios Mayo, what are you doing to our bloodline?" My boyfriend instantly squeezed my hand as if to say, "It's okay, we got this." Meanwhile, tears were streaming down my face. "My love, what have you done to yourself?" my mom screamed while trying to undo my slick back bun and straighten it out with her fingers. And that's when she saw Carlos. Her mouth opened so wide, I thought her jaw was about to snap into two. "Ah, you almost had me believing that this monkey was actually your boyfriend. But I understand you're young, just messing around." She then chuckled to herself as if it was the funniest thing in the world. My dad then grabbed my hand to bring me inside and immediately handed my sister the skin whitening cream to put on my face, except it wasn't the same one from when I was a child. This one hurt. "Hey, stop, get away from me," I yelled, tears streaming down my face. Within seconds, blisters had filled my face and I was peeling all over. As I screamed, Carlos called the hospital. I figured by this point my parents would realize they were being idiots. But no, my dad tried to wrestle with Carlos to grab the phone from him. "Pain is beauty. Our Mija will be beautiful." Meanwhile, my entire face felt like it had been dipped in hot sauce over 100 times. Luckily, they still arrived, and by the time I was seen by nurses, my eyebrows had already been burnt off. The next morning when I woke up from the skin grafting procedure, I was faced with my boyfriend kissing my hand and calling me beautiful, until I checked my phone. I immediately noticed I had been bombarded with dozens of texts and missed calls. The first voicemail was angry, telling me I was a disappointment to the family. The second was threatening. By the 10th, my sister was begging to not press charges. I stared at my phone screen, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the messages. Each one felt like another chemical burn, except this time on my soul instead of my face. Carlos gently took the phone from my hands and set it aside, his jaw clenched as he read through some of the texts himself. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic, and the faint vanilla from the air freshener plugged into the wall. My face throbbed beneath the bandages, a constant reminder of what my own family had done to me. The nurse came in to check my vitals, her eyes soft with sympathy as she adjusted my IV drip. Carlos stayed by my side through every doctor visit, every bandage change, every moment of pain. He held my hand when the plastic surgeon explained the extent of the damage, how the chemical burns had gone deeper than they initially thought. He wiped my tears when they showed me photos of what my face looked like underneath the gauze. My sister started calling on the 3rd day. I watched Carlos decline call after call, his protective instincts kicking in every time her name flashed on the screen, but the voicemails kept coming. She alternated between crying about how sorry she was and insisting that I was overreacting, that the product was supposed to work differently, that I just had sensitive skin. The worst part was hearing my mother's voice in the background of one message, coaching my sister on what to say. I could picture them huddled together in our childhood kitchen, strategizing about how to make this all go away, how to convince me that nearly melting my face off was somehow my fault for not being committed enough to their twisted beauty standards. Carlos's family visited on day 4. His mother brought homemade arroz con gandules and held my hand while speaking to me in rapid Spanish about how beautiful I was, how strong I was, how no real mother would ever hurt her child this way. His father stood quietly by the door, occasionally patting Carlos on the shoulder and muttering about what he'd like to do to anyone who hurt his future daughter-in-law. The comparison between his family and mine felt like another kind of burn. Here were people who barely knew me, showing more genuine care and concern than my own parents ever had. They didn't care about the bandages covering my face, or the fact that my natural skin tone showed through on my arms. They just saw someone their son loved who was hurting. On the 5th day, my father showed up at the hospital. Security had to escort him out when he started yelling about how I was being dramatic, how I was ruining the family's reputation, how I needed to come home and let them fix this properly. Carlos had to physically hold me back from ripping out my IV to chase after him, to scream at him about what properly had already done to me. The texts from extended family started rolling in after that. Aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about my rebellion and my rejection of family values. Each message was another reminder of how deep this sickness ran in my family tree, how many people had bought into this toxic idea that lighter meant better, that burning your own children was acceptable if it made them more beautiful. My sister's messages messages became more desperate as the days passed. She sent photos of herself crying, her already pale face somehow even more washed out from the tears. She wrote long paragraphs about how she was just trying to help, how she loved me, how she couldn't understand why I was being so cruel to the family. Not once did she acknowledge what they had actually done to me. Not once did she ask how I was healing. Carlos had to start screening my messages after I broke down reading one from my mother that detailed all the ways I had disappointed them over the years. Every time I got too tan from running, every time I wore my hair natural instead of straightened, every time I spoke Spanish with my natural accent instead of trying to sound refined. 23 years of perceived failures listed out like a grocery receipt. The hardest part was the small voice in my head that still wanted their approval. Even lying in a hospital bed with second-degree chemical burns on my face, part of me wondered if maybe I had overreacted. Maybe if I had just been more careful with the product. Maybe if I had built up a tolerance like my sister had over the years. Maybe if I had tried harder to be what they wanted. Carlos seemed to sense when these thoughts crept in. He'd squeeze my hand and remind me that loving parents don't hurt their children. He'd list all the things he loved about me, starting with my strength and ending with my beautiful brown skin that had survived years of their attempts to erase it. He'd kiss my forehead, the only part of my face not covered in bandages, and promise that I never had to see them again if I didn't want to. But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. My family didn't believe in boundaries. They believed in wearing you down until you gave in guilt trips that lasted for generations, in love that came with conditions written in bleach and burns. They wouldn't just let me walk away, not when I represented everything they had spent their entire lives trying to deny about themselves. The discharge paperwork felt heavier than it should have when the nurse finally brought it on day 7. Going home meant dealing with a flood of messages that had built up. It meant figuring out how to move forward when the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had literally burned me for not meeting their conditions. It meant accepting that the family I had always hoped they could become would never exist. Carlos drove me to his apartment instead of mine. He'd already arranged for some of my things to be brought over, knowing I wouldn't feel safe in my own space yet. His roommate had cleared out for a few days to give us privacy. The normalcy of his living room, with its mismatched furniture and video game consoles, felt like stepping into another world. I sat on his couch and finally listened to all the voicemails. Carlos sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders, letting me process each one at my own pace. My mother's voice grew more shrill with each message. My father's threats escalated from disappointment to disownment. My sister's tears sounded increasingly manufactured. By the time I reached the last message, I felt hollow. The final voicemail was different. It was my sister, but she wasn't crying. Her voice was cold, calculated. She informed me that if I pursued any legal action, if I told anyone else about what happened, if I continued to slander the family, they would make sure everyone knew what an ungrateful daughter I was. She said I was already ugly on the outside now, and they wouldn't let me make the family ugly too. Carlos took the phone from my shaking hands and deleted the message. Then he blocked every single family member's number, one by one, while I watched. It felt like watching him build a wall between me and the people who had spent my entire life tearing me down. With each blocked contact, I felt a little lighter. That night, I stood in front of his bathroom mirror and slowly unwrapped the bandages. The face staring back at me was raw, patchy, with angry red marks where the chemicals had eaten through layers of skin. My eyebrows were gone, leaving my face looking strangely vulnerable. The tears came then, not because I mourned my appearance, but because I finally understood that this was what my family's love looked like. This was the price of trying to be beautiful enough for them. Carlos found me there and wrapped his arms around me from behind. We stood like that for a long time, looking at my damaged face in the mirror, not speaking. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been written in scars across my skin, but his presence said everything I needed to hear, that I was still worthy of love, that beauty wasn't worth burning for, that family could be chosen, not just born into. The healing would take time, the doctors had said, not just for my face, but for all of it. The years of damage went deeper than any chemical burn, but standing there in Carlos's bathroom, surrounded by his mismatched towels and half-empty shampoo bottles, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, safe, accepted, free to exist in my own skin, damaged as it was. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. My family wouldn't give up easily. There would be more messages, more guilt trips, more attempts to pull me back into their toxic cycle. But tonight, I was just a woman looking at her true face for the first time, held by someone who loved her not despite her color, but because of everything she was. And that was enough to start building something new from the ashes of what my family had tried to burn away. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. Carlos had gone back to work, insisting I rest and heal when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my sister standing there, her skeletal frame wrapped in an oversized sweater despite the Florida heat. She held a basket of what looked like homemade food, her hands trembling slightly as she waited. I opened the door against my better judgment. She immediately started crying, reaching out to touch my face before pulling back when she saw me flinch. The basket dropped to the ground as she collapsed into herself, sobbing about how sorry she was, how she never meant for this to happen, how the family was falling apart without me. Carlos's neighbor peeked out, concerned by the commotion. I waved her off and reluctantly let my sister inside. She sat on the edge of the couch, looking around the apartment with barely concealed judgment. Her eyes lingered on Carlos's family photos, his parents' brown faces smiling from silver frames. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos of our mother, who apparently hadn't left her bed since the hospital incident. The images showed her lying dramatically across her comforter, tissues scattered around her like fallen leaves. My sister explained that our mother refused to eat, claiming her daughter had broken her heart by choosing ugliness over family. The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh, almost. Instead, I watched my sister's performance with a mixture of pity and disgust. She kept touching her own face, running her fingers along her hollow cheeks, as if reassuring herself that her sacrifices had been worth it. When I didn't immediately forgive everything, she switched tactics. She started talking about our cousin's upcoming wedding, how the whole family would be there, how questions would be asked about my absence. She painted a picture of me as the family pariah, the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her loving parents over a simple misunderstanding. Her phone buzzed constantly during her visit. Each time she'd glance at it nervously before continuing her plea. I knew our parents were coaching her, feeding her lines like directors in a twisted play. The realization that even now, even after everything, they couldn't speak to me directly, spoke volumes about their true feelings. After an hour of her monologue, I finally stood up. She scrambled to her feet, hope flickering in her sunken eyes. I walked to the door and held it open. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. She gathered her things slowly, deliberately, giving me every chance to change my mind. At the threshold, she turned back one more time. Her final words were about how I was culling our mother with my selfishness. The door closed on her protests, but I could hear her crying in the hallway for several minutes before her footsteps finally faded away. Carlos found me curled up on the couch when he got home, the untouched basket of food sitting on the coffee table like an accusation. He took one look at my face and knew. Without a word, he disposed of the basket and held me while I processed the visit. The next morning brought a new assault. My phone, phone, which Carlos had forgotten to silence, exploded with notifications from social media. My sister had posted a series of photos from our childhood, carefully curated to show our happy family. Each image showed us progressively lighter, our natural color fading with each year like a tragic time lapse. The captions were worse than the photos. She wrote about missing her sister, about family bonds that should never be broken, about forgiveness being the greatest gift. The comment section filled with relatives and family friends expressing shock at our estrangement, offering prayers for reconciliation, some even scolding me for hurting my parents. Carlos helped me report and block each post, but new ones kept appearing. My sister had created multiple accounts, determined to wage her campaign across every platform. Some posts included photos of my parents looking frail and sad, strategically lit to emphasize their supposed suffering. My aunt started calling Carlos's phone when mine remained blocked. She left voicemails about family honor, about respecting elders, about how American culture had corrupted me. She reminded me of all the sacrifices my parents had made, conveniently forgetting that those sacrifices included my skin and self-worth. The harassment escalated when they discovered I was staying with Carlos. His apartment building's security camera caught my father trying to gain entry by claiming a family emergency. When that failed, he waited in the parking lot, confronting Carlos as he left for work. Carlos described the encounter later, his jaw tight with controlled anger. My father had grabbed his arm, demanding to know what kind of man kept a daughter from her family. He'd accused Carlos of brainwashing me, of taking advantage of my confusion about beauty and identity. The conversation ended when Carlos firmly removed my father's hand and stated that real men don't hurt the women they claim to love. My father's response was to spit at Carlos's feet before storming off, shouting about dishonor and ingratitude. That evening, we found a note slipped under the apartment door. My mother's handwriting, usually so precise, looked shaky and desperate. She wrote about the dreams she'd had for me, the life she'd planned, the beautiful pale children I was supposed to give her. The letter ended with a threat disguised as concern. She worried what would happen if I continued down this path of darkness, both literal and metaphorical. The psychological warfare intensified over the following days. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered my existence. Each call Carlos intercepted carried the same message wrapped in different words. I was destroying the family, breaking my mother's heart, spitting on my culture. My sister's health became their favorite weapon. She started sending photos of herself at the hospital, claiming the stress of our family's fracture had made her sick. The images showed 4 drips and heart monitors, though Carlos pointed out inconsistencies that suggested they were taken at different times, possibly even different hospitals. She posted about fainting spells, about her body giving up, about how her sister's cruelty was culling her slowly. The manipulation was so blatant it would have been laughable if it wasn't so twisted. Using her self-inflicted health issues as emotional blackmail reached a new low, even for my family. My parents recruited flying monkeys from every corner of our extended network. Cousins messaged about upcoming family events I'd be missing. Childhood friends reached out with concern about my breakdown. Even our old neighbor contacted Carlos's mother, trying to gather information about my whereabouts and condition. Carlos's family became collateral damage in my family's campaign. His mother received calls suggesting she didn't know what kind of damaged goods her son had taken in. His father found anonymous notes on his car warning about the dangers of mixing with ungrateful blood. His sister's social media filled with messages from strangers defending traditional family values. Through it all, Carlos remained steady. He changed his phone number, installed new locks, and even took different routes to work to avoid potential confrontations. His family, bless them, saw through my family's tactics immediately. His mother started cooking extra meals, delivering them with tight hugs, and whispered reassurances that I was family now. The breaking point came 2 weeks after my sister's visit. I was finally feeling strong enough to venture outside, my face still tender, but healing. Carlos and I went to a small cafe near his apartment, somewhere we thought was safe from my family's reach. We were wrong. Halfway through our meal, my mother walked in. The shock of seeing her made me drop my fork. She looked different, older, grayer, but with the same calculating eyes that had measured my worth in shades of white my entire life. She didn't approach immediately. Instead, she ordered coffee and sat at a nearby table, positioning herself in my direct line of sight. Every few minutes, she'd dab at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of a grieving mother. Other patrons started noticing, whispering about the sad woman crying into her coffee. Carlos moved to block her from my view, but the damage was done. My appetite vanished, replaced by the familiar knot of anxiety that my family specialized in creating. We left money on the table and headed for the door, my mother's eyes following our every move. Outside, she finally approached. Carlos stepped between us, but she spoke over his shoulder, her words aimed like arrows at my heart. She talked about the shame I'd brought upon them, how neighbors asked about my absence, how she couldn't hold her head up at church anymore. Her voice rose with each accusation, drawing stares from passersby. This was intentional. My mother had always been a master of public manipulation. She knew I hated scenes, knew the attention would make me want to shrink into myself. Carlos guided me away, but she followed, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown to disaster. She grabbed my arm as we reached his car, her nails digging in through my sleeve. The contact sent me back to childhood, to all the times those hands had rubbed chemicals into my skin. I yanked away, the sudden movement making her stumble. She immediately began wailing about her ungrateful daughter attacking her, loud enough for everyone in the parking lot to hear. A security guard started approaching, and Carlos quickly got me into the car before the situation could escalate further. As we drove away, I saw her in the side mirror, still performing for her audience of strangers. The image burned into my mind, my mother, choosing public manipulation over private reconciliation, more concerned with appearances than her daughter's well-being. Back at the apartment, I finally broke down completely. The walls I'd built to protect myself crumbled under the weight of her theatrical display. Carlos held me as I sobbed, not just for the mother I'd lost, but for the mother I'd never really had. The cafe incident marked a new phase in their campaign. Having failed with direct confrontation, they shifted to guerrilla tactics. I started finding things left at the apartment door, old photos, childhood toys, even the dress I'd worn to my quinceañera, each item carefully chosen to evoke maximum guilt. My sister began showing up at Carlos's workplace, waiting in the lobby with tears and pleas for him to let her see me. Security eventually had to escort her out when she refused to leave, but not before she'd made sure everyone knew she was just a loving sister trying to reunite with family. The stress started affecting my healing. The doctor noticed during a follow-up appointment, commenting that my scars weren't fading as quickly as expected. Stress, he explained, could slow the body's ability to repair itself. My family was literally preventing me from healing, even from a distance. Carlos suggested we move, find somewhere they couldn't follow, but I knew running wouldn't solve anything. My family's reach extended beyond geography. They existed in my head, in my scars, in every doubt that crept in during quiet moments. Instead, we started building boundaries like walls. Carlos installed a security system. We documented every incident, every unwanted contact, every manipulation attempt, not for legal purposes. I still couldn't bring myself to involve police, but for my own sanity, proof that I wasn't imagining the harassment. My sister's social media campaign reached new heights of delusion. She posted old photos of us with captions about how I'd been lost to darkness, both figuratively and literally. She shared before and after photos showing her own transformation to paleness, lamenting that I'd chosen to go backward. The comments on these posts revealed how deep the sickness ran in our community. Relatives praised my sister's dedication to beauty. Friends from childhood congratulated her on maintaining standards. Some even shared their own stories of fighting against their natural coloring, as if melanin was a disease to be cured. Reading these comments, I realized I wasn't just fighting my immediate family. I was standing against generations of internalized hatred. Every aunt who praised light skin, every cousin who spent fortunes on whitening creams, every family friend who complimented paleness over health, they were all part of the system that had burned my face and scarred my soul. My mother tried one last manipulation before the month ended. She had my grandmother call Carlos's phone. My sweet grandmother, who'd always been kind, who'd snuck me mangoes when my mother restricted my diet to maintain my paleness. Hearing her voice broke something inside me. She spoke about family unity, about forgiveness, about how she didn't have many years left and wanted to see her granddaughters reconciled. The guilt hit like a physical blow. Carlos watched my face crumble and gently took the phone, explaining that I needed time to heal, both physically and emotionally. My grandmother's response revealed she'd been coached. She immediately launched into how I was culling my mother, how the family was suffering, how I needed to stop being selfish. The sweet woman I remembered transformed into another weapon in my family's arsenal. After Carlos hung up, I made a decision. I called my therapist and booked an emergency session. The time had come to stop just defending against my family's attacks and start building something stronger, a sense of self that couldn't be dissolved by their emotional acid. The therapist helped me see the patterns I'd been blind to. Every attack followed the same playbook: guilt, manipulation, public embarrassment, false health crises, and weaponized relatives. My family operated like a toxic organism, each member playing their role in breaking down my resistance. She also helped me understand why I kept hoping for change. The trauma bond ran deep, forged in childhood by parents who'd alternated between affection and abuse based on how light my skin looked that day. Breaking free meant grieving not just who they were, but who I'd always hoped they could become. Carlos attended some sessions with me, learning how to support without enabling. The therapist warned us that extinction bursts were common. When manipulation stopped working, the behavior would intensify before finally dying out. We needed to prepare for whatever desperate measures my family might attempt. The preparation proved necessary. As the month drew to a close, my family's individual efforts merged into a coordinated assault. They showed up together one evening: parents, sister, aunts, uncles, cousins, a whole delegation of genetic hatred standing outside Carlos's apartment building. Security called Carlos while keeping them in the lobby. We watched on the building's app as they performed their grief for the cameras, my mother actually dropping to her knees at one point. My sister, looking more skeletal than ever, leaned against the wall as if too weak to stand. The security guard later told us they'd claimed it was a medical emergency, that I was mentally ill and needed family intervention. When that didn't work, they'd tried bribing him, then threatening his job. He'd stood firm, eventually calling police when they refused to leave. Watching my family escorted out by officers felt surreal. My mother's wails echoed through the lobby. My father's face contorted with rage as he shouted about American laws destroying families. My sister had to be practically carried out, her self-starvation finally catching up with her performance. The police took statements from building security and suggested we file for a restraining order. I still couldn't bring myself to take that step, but Carlos kept the officer's card just in case. The building management sent a notice banning my family from the property, a small protection that felt monumental. That night, I sat with Carlos on his balcony, the Florida humidity wrapping around us like a blanket. My face still ached sometimes, phantom pains from the chemical burns mixing with real healing itches. But for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something shifting inside me. The realization came quietly. My family's love had always been conditional, based on how closely I matched their impossible standards. No amount of skin lightening would have been enough. There would always have been another cream, another treatment, another way I was failing to be white enough for their approval. Carlos squeezed my hand as I voiced this revelation. He'd known, of course. His family had known. Everyone outside our toxic bubble had seen what I'd been too deep inside to recognize. Love wasn't supposed to come with chemical burns and shade counters. My phone, now permanently on silent, showed dozens of missed calls from unknown numbers. My family had recruited friends to call from their phones, trying to circumvent the blocks. Each attempt felt more desperate than the last, their need for control overriding any concern for my actual well-being. I made another decision that night. I would document my story, not for revenge or attention, but for my own processing and potentially to help others trapped in similar situations. The Reddit post had been reactive, written in pain and shock. This would be deliberate, thoughtful, honest about the complexity of loving people who hurt you. Carlos supported the idea, even helped me organize my thoughts. We spent hours going through old photos, noting the progression of my family's obsession. Pictures from my childhood showed a happy brown girl slowly disappearing under layers of foundation and fear. The process was painful but necessary. Each memory examined and properly filed away lost some of its power to hurt me. The guilt began transforming into something else, not anger exactly, but a sad understanding of how generational trauma had poisoned my family tree at its roots. As we worked, Carlos's phone rang, his mother checking in as she did every evening now. She asked about my healing, about our day, about what we'd eaten for dinner. Normal questions from a normal parent who cared about normal things. The contrast with my own family's obsessions felt like breathing clean air after years of smoke. She mentioned that someone had called her restaurant asking about me, pretending to be an old friend. She'd recognized the fishing expedition immediately and shut it down, but it showed my family's reach still extended wherever they could find a connection. The next few days brought more extinction burst behavior. My sister posted increasingly dramatic health updates, including a photo from an ambulance that Carlos reverse image searched to find was stolen from a medical website. My parents sent flowers to my old workplace, the card expressing condolences as if I'd died. Each escalation felt more desperate, more detached from reality. They were throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick, what would finally break my resolve and send me running back to their chemical embrace. But something had fundamentally changed inside me. The desperation that once would have sent me spiraling now seemed almost pitiful. These people who claimed to love me were willing to destroy themselves and everyone around them rather than accept my natural appearance. My therapist called it a paradigm shift. The lens through which I viewed my family had finally adjusted to show reality rather than the fantasy I'd clung to. They weren't misguided parents who loved too much. They were people so damaged by their own internalized racism that they'd rather burn their children than confront their prejudices. The next morning, my sister showed up at Carlos's workplace again. This time, she brought reinforcements. Our cousin Alexandra, who'd always been the family mediator. Security footage later showed them waiting in the parking garage for 3 hours. Alexandra holding my sister upright as she swayed from exhaustion. Carlos texted me from his office, warning me they were there. I spent the morning morning pacing his apartment, knowing they'd eventually give up and come here. Sure enough, around noon, the building's intercom buzzed repeatedly. Alexandra's voice crackled through, pleading for just 5 minutes of my time. I watched them through the security app on Carlos's tablet. My sister looked worse than before, her skin translucent under the harsh lobby lights. Alexandra kept checking her phone, probably receiving instructions from my parents. The security guard stood firm, pointing to the ban notice posted behind his desk. They left after an hour, but not before my sister collapsed against the glass doors. Alexandra struggled to support her weight, eventually calling someone to pick them up. I recognized my father's car pulling up to the curb, saw him gesture angrily at the building before they drove away. That afternoon, Carlos came home early. He'd been called into HR because my family had started contacting his company's main line, claiming he was holding me hostage. His boss understood the situation, but warned that continued harassment could affect his position. My family was now threatening his livelihood along with everything else. We spent the evening researching our options. Moving seemed inevitable now, but Carlos's job tied us to the area. We looked at apartments across town, calculated the costs of breaking his lease, discussed whether I should return to my own place that had been sitting empty since Thanksgiving. While we planned, my phone lit up with notifications from a family group chat I'd forgotten to leave. My mother had added me back somehow, and the messages flooded in. Photos of my sister in various medical settings, each more dramatic than the last. Messages from aunts about family curses and broken bloodlines. My uncle sharing articles about children who abandoned their parents. Carlos took my phone and left the group chat, but the damage was done. I couldn't stop thinking about my sister, wondering how much of her condition was real versus performed. The girl who used to sneak me candy when our parents weren't looking had become a weapon in their war against my independence. 3 days later, we found out exactly how far they'd go. Carlos's mother called in tears. Someone had spray painted "ungrateful" across her restaurant's front window. Security cameras showed a figure in a hoodie, but the build looked suspiciously like my father's. The police took a report, but without clear identification, nothing could be done. Carlos's family rallied around us. His sister helped clean the graffiti while his father stood guard. His mother cooked enough food to feed an army, stress baking her way through the crisis. They never once suggested I was too much trouble, never implied I should go back to keep the peace. The contrast with my own family's conditional love became even starker. Here were people who'd known me less than a year, defending me against blood relatives who'd raised me. They saw me as family not because of how I looked, but because I loved their son, and he loved me. My mother's next move was crueler than expected. She contacted my employer directly, spinning a tale about my mental instability and need for family intervention. Fortunately, my boss had seen the chemical burns herself when I'd returned to work. She recognized manipulation when she saw it and warned me about the calls, but the seed of doubt had been planted in my workplace. Colleagues whispered when I passed, wondering what kind of family drama would spill into the office. Some avoided me entirely, not wanting to get involved in whatever mess I was dealing with. My professional life, which had been my escape, became another battlefield. I started working from home more often, grateful for the flexibility, but hating that they'd driven me into hiding. Carlos's apartment became our fortress, the only place where their reach couldn't quite extend. We developed routines around their patterns of attack, checking doors before leaving, screening all calls, documenting everything. The documentation proved useful when my sister escalated again. She showed up at my workplace during lunch, causing a scene in the lobby about needing to see her dying sister. Security removed her, but not before several co-workers witnessed her performance. She'd worn a hospital bracelet, though the date was conveniently obscured. My boss called me into her office that afternoon. She expressed sympathy but made it clear that continued disruptions couldn't be tolerated. I understood. No employer wanted this kind of drama affecting their business. Another victory for my family's campaign of isolation. Carlos and I spent that night updating resumes and searching for remote positions. If we couldn't physically escape them, maybe we could at least minimize their ability to disrupt our livelihoods. The idea of letting them win by forcing us to change our lives stung, but practicality outweighed pride. A week passed with relative quiet. We should have known they were planning something. The calm before their biggest storm yet came in the form of a registered letter, delivered on a Thursday morning. Legal letterhead, though not from any legitimate law firm. My uncle's friend who'd gotten an online law degree. The letter threatened action for elderly abuse, claiming I'd abandoned my parents in their time of need, causing emotional distress and health complications. It was laughably amateur, full of legal-sounding words that meant nothing, but the intent was clear: scare me into compliance through official-looking documents. Carlos wanted to hire a real lawyer to respond, but I knew that's what they wanted, to drag me into a battle that would drain our resources and energy. Instead, we filed it with our growing collection of evidence, another example of their escalating harassment. My sister's social media took a darker turn. She started posting old photos of us with captions about losing a sister to death, complete with rest in peace hashtags. Friends who didn't know the full story offered condolences, creating a narrative where I'd actually died, rather than simply refused to be chemically burned. The posts attracted attention from people outside our immediate circle. Old classmates reached out, confused about reports of my death when they'd seen me active online. I had to explain repeatedly that I was alive, just estranged from family, watching my sister's grief performance from a distance. Carlos's apartment building increased security after multiple attempts by my family to gain entry. The property manager, a kind woman named Vic, shared that she'd dealt with similar situations before. She recommended additional cameras and offered to testify if we ever needed legal documentation of their harassment. My workplace situation deteriorated further when my mother showed up during a client meeting. She'd somehow learned my schedule and timed her arrival for maximum disruption. The scene she caused in the conference room, wailing about her ungrateful daughter, cost me an important account. That was my breaking point with the job. I submitted my resignation that afternoon, unable to continue bringing their chaos into a professional environment. My boss accepted it with visible relief, though she offered a generous severance and glowing reference, understanding I was a victim of circumstances beyond my control. Carlos held me that night as I grieved another loss to their campaign. My career had been one of the few things unrelated to their beauty obsession, proof that I could succeed on merit rather than melanin. Now even that was tainted by their poison. The job loss emboldened them. My father started showing up at Carlos's workplace daily, sitting in the lobby with printed photos of our family. He'd tell anyone who'd listen about his daughter's betrayal, how Carlos had stolen me away, how American values had corrupted their traditional family. Building security eventually banned him too, but he just moved to the sidewalk outside. Carlos started using the back entrance, adjusting his entire routine around my father's harassment. His coworkers grew uncomfortable, some questioning whether our relationship was worth this chaos. We found a new apartment across town, signing the lease under only Carlos's name to make us harder to track. The moving process happened in secret, using friends' vehicles and working in shifts to avoid detection. It felt like escaping an abusive relationship, which I suppose it was. The new place was smaller but felt safer. No family members knew the address yet. We installed security systems immediately, set up cameras, made friends with neighbors who'd watch for suspicious visitors. Building our fortress fortress stronger this time. My sister's health posts grew increasingly alarming. Photos showed her hooked to machines, though reverse image searches revealed some were stock photos. She claimed organ failure from stress, rare conditions triggered by family abandonment. The manipulation was transparent but effective on relatives who wanted to believe. Some family members began reaching out with genuine concern rather than condemnation. A cousin admitted she'd noticed the toxicity but felt powerless to speak up. An aunt confessed she'd spent thousands on skin lightening before realizing the futility. Small cracks in the family facade, but not enough to create real change. Carlos proposed on a quiet Tuesday evening, nothing fancy, just us on our new balcony with takeout from his mother's restaurant. He said he wanted to make it official. I was his family now, legally and completely. The ring was simple, purchased with savings we'd earmarked for security deposits. I said yes without hesitation. Whatever legal protections marriage could offer, whatever statement it made about choosing our own family, I wanted it all. We decided on a courthouse ceremony, just us and his immediate family. No announcements that could attract unwanted attention. My mother somehow discovered our plans. The next wave of messages focused on the shame of a daughter marrying without family blessing, predictions of cursed unions and damaged children. She sent photos of wedding dresses she'd saved for me, all designed to hide my natural coloring. We married on a Friday afternoon, Carlos's family filling the small courtroom with genuine joy. His mother cried happy tears, his father took countless photos, his sister threw rice despite the courthouse rules. It was everything a wedding should be, celebrating love without conditions or chemical burns. The marriage certificate felt like armor against their next attacks. When my sister claimed I'd been brainwashed by Carlos's family, we had legal proof of our mutual choice. When my parents threatened to have me declared incompetent, our marriage license showed otherwise. Their extinction burst reached its peak 2 weeks after the wedding. My entire extended family appeared at Carlos's mother's restaurant during dinner rush, 23 people demanding to know where I was, causing chaos that required police intervention. The incident made local news, though names were withheld. That public embarrassment finally shamed some relatives into backing off. My grandmother called Carlos to apologize, admitting she'd been pressured into participating. A few cousins privately messaged support, though they couldn't risk public alliance. The family wall showed its first real cracks. My sister posted one final dramatic update, a goodbye letter to her dead sister, complete with childhood photos and fabricated memories of our closeness. The post went viral in our community, drawing attention that backfired when people noticed her skeletal appearance and questioned who was really harming whom. Carlos and I watched from our new apartment as my family's campaign finally consumed itself. Their escalating tactics had exposed their toxicity to everyone watching. The very community they'd tried to impress saw through the performance to the abuse underneath. We started building our new life intentionally. Carlos's family embraced me fully, his mother teaching me recipes without commenting on my skin. We found new doctors who didn't know our history, established routines that didn't revolve around avoiding harassment. Slowly, we created space to heal. My face bore permanent reminders of their love, scars that would never fully fade, patches where pigment would always be irregular. But Carlos kissed those scars every morning, reminding me they were proof of survival, not surrender. My body had endured their worst and still carried me forward. The silence from my family felt strange after months of constant assault. No more messages, no more ambushes, no more flying monkeys. They'd exhausted their tactics and themselves. My sister's social media went quiet. My parents stopped their public performances. I heard through community gossip that my sister had been hospitalized for real this time, malnutrition finally catching up to her destroyed body. My parents were reportedly caring for her, forced to confront the physical consequences of their beauty obsession. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. Carlos and I settled into our new normal, work-from-home jobs that couldn't be disrupted, a small circle of friends who understood our story, his family as our primary support system. We built something my birth family could never give, unconditional acceptance and genuine care. 6 months after the wedding, I saw my mother at a grocery store. She looked older, grayer, diminished somehow. We made eye contact across the produce section. For a moment, I thought she might approach. Instead, she turned away, pretending not to see the daughter she'd burned for being too brown. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just empty space where family should have been. Carlos found me standing there, staring at tomatoes I'd forgotten to bag. He took my hand, kissed my scarred forehead, and we finished shopping together. Our normal life, built on ashes but growing stronger. The therapist called it successful detachment. I'd grieved the family I'd never had, accepted the one that existed, and chosen to build something better. The scars would always be there, physical and emotional, but they no longer defined my worth or dictated my choices. Our life became beautifully ordinary. Sunday dinners with Carlos's family, where no one counted shade exposure. Morning runs without foundation. My brown skin glowing with health. Work calls where colleagues saw my competence, not my coloring. Simple freedoms that felt revolutionary after a lifetime of chemical warfare. I started writing about the experience, not for revenge, but for processing. The words came slowly at first, then in floods. Stories of childhood slaps for sun exposure, teenage years spent under layers of lightning cream, the final burning that freed me from their grip. Therapeutic rather than public, just for me. Carlos supported every step of healing. He never pushed for reconciliation, never suggested I was too harsh, never implied I should forgive for the sake of peace. He understood that some burns go too deep for bandages. Some toxins require complete extraction to heal. A year after cutting contact, I felt ready to share my story publicly, not for attention or sympathy, but for others trapped in similar cycles. The Reddit post was raw, honest about the complexity of loving people who hurt you for not meeting impossible standards. The response overwhelmed me. Messages from others who'd endured similar treatment, who'd been burned literally or figuratively for their natural selves. A community of survivors finding strength in shared experiences, building chosen families from the ashes of biological ones. My sister reached out once through a mutual friend. She was recovering slowly, learning to eat again, questioning everything our parents had taught her. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to maybe start over. I wasn't ready yet, might never be. Some bridges burned too completely to rebuild, but I left the door cracked open, sent word that I was glad she was healing, that I hoped she found peace with herself. No promises, no timeline, just acknowledgement that we were both victims of the same poisoned love. Maybe someday we'd find our way to something healthier. For now, I had enough. A husband who loved my brown skin and scarred face, a chosen family who measured worth in kindness, not color, work that valued my mind over my melanin, a life built on authentic ground rather than chemical foundations. The healing continued daily. Some mornings I still reached for foundation 2 shades too light before remembering I didn't need to hide anymore. Sometimes I caught myself counting sun exposure before Carlos reminded me that sunshine was healthy. Recovery wasn't linear, but it was real. My family's love had come with conditions written in chemical burns and shade counters. They'd offered acceptance at the price of my authentic self, affection that required self-destruction. I'd paid that price for 23 years before the final burning freed me from their grip. Now I lived in my own skin, brown and scarred, but finally mine. The family I'd built didn't count my steps in sunshine or measure my worth in whiteness. They loved me not despite my color, but as part of my complete self. It wasn't the family I'd been born into, but it was the one I'd chosen, and that made all the difference. The scars would always tell the story of what I'd survived, but they also marked the moment I'd chosen myself over their impossible standards, Carlos over their conditional love, authenticity over chemical acceptance. Every mark was proof that I'd rather be burned being myself than praised for being someone else. That was my triumph. Not revenge or reconciliation, but simple survival. Building a life where love didn't require lightning cream, where family meant support, not sabotage, where my brown skin could exist without apology or alteration. It wasn't the ending they'd written for me, but it was mine, and that was enough.